All right, everybody, it's time to talk about valves. Now, let's think about the very first lesson and the whole figuring it out yourself because you have no assistance. And let's keep that mentality there, okay? So let's think about what we know, okay? By looking at it, we can tell that it has three valves, all right? I've showed you how to play a note, do some lip slurs, change the note without using valves. And hopefully you've tried pressing a valve down and doing those lip slurs and notice that you can do it anywhere. Any valve you have it down, you can do everything you can do on any other valve, just starting on a different pitch. So we have to first obviously just learn the basic valve sequence, and I will just show it to you. Open. This is open. Second, first valve. First and second valve. Second and third valve. First and third valve. All three. All right. Now let's talk about the partials of the horn real quick, because the lowest partial we don't really play, although I've heard trumpet players sound beautiful like a trombone and a flugelhorn or something. So this seems like what people think of as the lowest note. The lowest note on the trumpet is actually this. So, technically, if we wanted to play the full valve sequence on the very first partial of the trumpet, that would be its lowest note. This is what it would be. We never play those notes. Notice that I pressed the sequence down that I said and demonstrated, and each successive valve, it went down just a little bit more. Now, the distance it went down is a half step. It's the distance between a white key and a black key on the piano. And it's the shortest distance between notes in Western music. So that is what we're working with now. We have valves. So now we're learning how to cycle through the valve sequence. I like to do this as a warm-up, playing it really softly. Excuse me, warm down. I mean, I use this as something after a strenuous gig or playing experience when I want to massage things a little bit, when I feel like I've beaten myself up a little bit. All right, very simple. Let's think about it. You could have figured that out yourself. You just play a note, you start pressing valves down. You can tell that certain ones skip further down, certain ones go right next to it, and then slowly you figure out, okay, how do I go nothing but notes that are next to each other, and go straight down, and then you want to learn the sequence. So keep your logical reasoning going and your creative learning. Okay. So, now we've learned how to go through the sequence of the valves. Go through it, repeat it. By all means, play it with that whisper tone. Play it with normal tone too, but So you can just practice it. You can start very slow and Don't do it fast if it sounds bad. Like it's got to be a it's got to be, things have to sound even. All right, so now that we've got that down, now we have to start thinking about the rest of the range of the trumpet. Now let's remind ourselves again that the partials get closer and closer together. As in, the notes that you can play without pushing valves up and down, they start at a wide distance and they continue to get closer and closer and closer together. So, let's play the same valve sequence starting one partial above where we played it. So that would be... Alright, same exact thing on the next partial. Now, here's what I want you to do. I want you to play that partial down the sequence, and then I want you to go directly to the lower one that we played first and play that down the sequence. So in this particular case, the lowest note in the sequence of the second partial was immediately above the first note in the sequence of the partial below that. Excuse me, the third partial. Remember I said this is a forgotten partial. Anyways, let's just talk in practical trumpet playing. The lowest partial you'll deal with is the first one we played, starting on this all-important trumpet note. C. So, now what we've basically inadvertently done by playing the second sequence is we've played double the sequence, basically. So, we've basically played what is called the chromatic scale. The chromatic scale is all the notes in between two of the same notes, one being lower and one being higher. For example, the very lowest partial is an octave. So that is what an octave is. So a chromatic scale is playing all the notes in between that octave. Now, you notice that the last note of the sequence starting on G was one note, one half step above the C. And then you could play down all the way to the bottom of the sequence, and you can't play any further than that. And then there is an open spot where there aren't actually notes on the trumpet. Once you get past... So those notes weren't on the trumpet, and you can tell by the way they sound. Now this is interesting. So we're noticing that at the very lowest partial, since it is an octave in between, that means that it's going to be an octave in between every one of the sequences. And we've now noticed that the sequence does not go all the way down to the lowest note on the trumpet. So the lowest octave of the trumpet, the valves only cover half of the notes. All right, that's just sort of arbitrary knowledge. Now let's get back to the fact that you have basically played the chromatic scale. Only difference is it's only one octave. We played an octave plus one note. So let's just play an octave starting from the G again. So that is an octave. The top and bottom note are the same note, but one is high and one is low. Now, by linking the two sequences together and not going down to that lowest note, which is an F sharp. So we've gone G to G. Now we've played the chromatic scale. All right, so now let's continue up the range to understand this diminishing partials situation where they get smaller and smaller as you go up. So basically what I would say to you first is, for your own understanding, play the sequence off of every partial that you can. If you can't play any higher, don't force yourself to. But all the ones that are comfortably in your possession, explore the sequence there. So we tried the lowest one. Useless. Okay, here's the first thing you might use. Alright, next partial. Alright, now on the next partial, watch this. Now, you would have had to have noticed this by ear, but the next sequence overlaps with the one that started on G. So, the conclusion you're going to draw, if you were sitting on a desert island, is that since this starts here, and this goes down to here, I'm not going to need to play that far. Now also, you'll end up noticing that you can play this note this way. But if you come down from here, you can play it this way too. So, you're going to learn that as you go up, there is a preferred fingering. And basically, the preferred combination is always the highest one. So, what I mean is, the G is the first note in that combination. So, for that G, if it has any alternate valves, you're not going to use them. First and third is the second to the lowest note of the sequence starting on C. Okay, so now we've learned one principle. So we're eliminating the G and the F sharp because we don't need to use them. We have other fingerings that work, and if they have less valves, they're going to sound better. So now we've experienced our first sense of jumping from partial to partial, or jumping from the sequence to another partial and skipping part of the sequence. So now we're basically just playing all of the notes on the trumpet and we're building them up, okay? So far we've played So that's a pretty realistic beginner range. So you should explore that. Try to feel the same. Try not to feel like you change too much in between different parts of the range. Try to just move as little as possible. Try to keep the tone as steady as possible. And you just keep on going. So if we go one partial higher, we go up to the E. Now we notice that the C is also the E. This in the sequence of the E is also this. So we don't need the whole E sequence once we get to C. And then we don't need all of the C sequence because we've gotten to the open G. And now we're to the bottom of the range. And it just continues and continues. When you go up to the G, first and second is the note that's the same as E. And the notes basically just continue and continue to get closer and closer together. Now, we're not going to worry about extending our extreme range or anything like that right at the moment. I just want you to have an idea of the valves and how they work and how the trumpet is able to cover the range that other instruments cover in different ways. Now, there's going to be tuning issues when you're switching between all these different partials. Different valve combinations have different tuning. You even have a third slide down here. That is meant so that when you're on low D, you push it out because it's naturally sharp. Basically, the more valves down, the more sharp it's going to be. Okay, now let me just talk about scales in general. Now that you know the chromatic scale, you can figure every scale out. There's nothing I need to tell you. Basically, I'll tell you this. What a scale is not is something that does not contain a step. A step is either a whole step or a half step. A whole step is 2 half steps. So it'd be like this. So that's 2. So go straight down to it. That's a step. This is a half step. This is a whole step. A scale has to have those. A scale can also have what is called a minor third or diminished third because it's the smallest third. So, thirds are what make up chords, and we're not there yet. Chords. There are some funny scales that have a combination. But they're still scales because they have a step or a half step. Alright, so no more talking about scales because I don't want to talk about them. I want you to sit down and be like, alright, I've got this 12-note chromatic scale. That's how many notes there are in an octave of half steps. What are the different combinations that I can make with this that include either a half step or a whole step? And that is basically every scale there is. You just start figuring it out. I mean, okay, so the chromatic scale. So I want you to basically skip every other note starting on C. Okay, so I skipped every other note. Now let's play those notes by themselves. Kind of a funny scale. It's called the whole tone scale. Basically, it's just nothing but whole steps. Every note is the same, and that's a certain type of scale that you'll learn about. Scales that are symmetrical. But there's all kinds of combinations. The scale that most of you are probably familiar with, the major scale, is still a chromatic scale. You're just going to skip some of the notes. Now, that sounds like special, like it has to be taught to you, but no. I mean, come on. You figured out every note you can play on the trumpet with your valves, so now you can figure out scales. So my assignment to you is to begin to work on your chromatic scale. Remember to make everything as easy as possible, make the sound as beautiful as possible, in as consistent as a way as possible throughout the range of the horn from lowest to high. Try playing even dynamics, try starting quiet and getting loud. Try everything you could think of, but make sure that it's always effortless, always relaxed, and always easy, always comes naturally. And you'll be amazed at what you can find. And after you've done this, we can talk about scales and we can talk about chords and improvising and all these things and all this stuff you can do, you know. But if you sit at home and go through the frustrating process of sitting down and like writing out some different combinations that you've created using the notes of the chromatic scale, your concept of scales, your hearing of scales, your ability to understand them is going to be very second nature, so that when someone brings some book of crazy scales to you, you are ready to just absorb them instantly and apply them. You have a sense of what all scales are and how they all work. So, next time we will move on to chords. You know what? Forget it. Let's just do chords right now. Because that's the way my lessons are. Pure improvisation. Because if we're going to learn jazz, we need to be able to find symmetry within chaos, order within seemingly random occurrences. So, what's a chord? Nothing really. Just another manifestation of the chromatic scale. You've got all the notes. You don't need any help. I don't even need to give you any lessons on chords. Chords? Okay. Skip notes. Skip 2 notes. All right. Practice them. Do whatever you want with them. All right. How about this? Let's say that you've learned your C major scale that we briefly mentioned earlier, okay? Well, now I want you to skip every other note in the C major scale. Okay. C major 7 arpeggio. There's lots of different chords. There's lots of different scales. I want you to explore them. I want you to try to find every combination there is. I want you to be insane about it. I want you to write it down. I mean, there's no reason why after you sit down with a notebook, every book out there becomes obsolete because you've written every single combination of notes you can think of. Now that's just hypothetical and ridiculous, but you see my point. Learn on your own. All you need is a few small pieces to discover a whole array of what's going on.